Fouzia, today I want to talk about one thing very specific,
जी
which relates with current situation and
हाँ
which relates with our history, entire history of Pakistan.
okay
And I think that important thing is, and where you have made a very, very important difference,
हाँ
that our people don't know their own power.
हाँ true
I think that is something missing from our discourse.
yes
And they think if I have any problem,
hmm
I was reading British parliamentary paper. They said whenever a Muslim peasant is hungry, he has a
हाँ
strong tendency to blame the government.
हाँ
So the thing is, we have so much power,
yes
but we don't know that how to use that power
हाँ
and what is that power and how much difference we can make.
ठीक
I don't have to become a prime minister or to be a leader of a political
हाँ
party.
और a victim
And yeah, and that is what you have shown through your work. Biggest thing a political party can do is to introduce legislation to change the
हाँ
laws.
हाँ
And most of them don't attend even parliament session or do any
yes
legislation.
yes
And you have done remarkable work in introducing legislation for women, for marginalized groups in Pakistan. So we want to hear that story, to be very specific.
okay okay ठीक है. Well, I think the beginning of my activism was what really got me into bringing about changes. And that started in my late school age, college age, when I was a student. And those were the days where students were very empowered. I used to live in Peshawar. So I was quite active and I was leading the students into this protest or that, or just, coming together and solving our problems. But that time is different than my career time, because in my career, first I joined the government and learned ABC about the government, and then I joined the development sector in United Nations Development Program. And that is where I learned how these big development agencies work and what are these development projects and how do people participate in that. So that was the basis, the basic work. And I think that if you want to strategize, you really need to know how your own machinery works and how your opportunities are laid down. Like any board game, you first need to get the rules and the techniques down, and then you start being innovative. Like there was a time the people used to make fun of the abstract artists, artists
Yeah.
who were not realists. And you have to be a very good realist to then innovate enough to present that scenery in a few strokes.
Yes, because if you don't know, then you believe in magic or magical personalities who will come and change everything. So
Then you keep
yeah,
creating the myths.
yeah,
You have to learn. And what I have learned is, in my process of learning about society, learning about the government, learning about development agencies, what I have learned is that if you are, I'm not saying that you are in confrontation with another party, but whatever your other is, you are one and then you have the other. You have to be almost 100 times better than the other,
yeah.
and then you can maneuver and change things and convince people and bring them on board, etc. But you have to be way ahead of them in terms of understanding your own issues, the dynamics, and how the agencies work.
Great. Yeah, I think that's very important because we don't give much importance to that. Knowing the game, knowing the rules, how to change them.
Yes.
So my interest is to learn from you what is the first law in our parliament that you wanted change and how did you produce? Because we want to use this opportunities for the young people who are watching this to learn from you how our legislative system works.
Okay.
Where did you start? What you did? Yeah, please.
Okay. Well, I was part of organized women's groups also. So I was well connected with the women's activists and people who wanted to bring about a change. Not that they were too organized, but still I had enough experience. And in terms of legislation, I felt that because I was working with a lot of women who would face crisis, and I founded an institution. And it was very strange that women who get beaten up for decades by their family or by their husband, and we would provide them with emergency help and overnight, like a shelter. And then we would go to the police, and the police would say, okay, oh, yes, we got a complaint that she ran away with a lot of jewelry. And we would say, what? And they say, yeah, yeah, we will get a hold of her and we will return her to her family because she left with this and that. So one would feel that here we are trying to help women who face crisis. And then the police is not, the whole institution is not with you. And actually, we realize that the husband would manipulate and mobilize the whole judiciary system, judiciary, police, law enforcing system, and would create a whole havoc against her.
Yeah,
When we would go to the hospital, the medical legal would not make a report of all the injuries. And he says, why do you want to separate husband and wife? Are,
yeah.
bhai,
These were your Bedari days when you created
yes,
Bedari. Right. Okay.
yes.
Right.
And that is why I believed that there is a mega problem with either the rules, legislation, enforcement, because suddenly the whole institution, and I'm not talking about one, the whole law enforcing institution, they take on the other side. And so we realized that, I mean, I remember there was one time when and we were told not to argue with the police too much because they can take you away too. But I remember I argued and I said, "Ki, this woman is 45 years old and she is not below 18. So she can leave and she can go wherever she wants as an adult." And they were arguing with me that no, she has to get the permission of the husband. And I said, no, we are not living in Saudi Arabia or any other country.
Yeah.
So that was where my awareness kind of gradually came, that the social system or the patriarchal chains are very strong and they take over the rules, regulations, and laws and implementation, and whatever people think is okay, they go in that direction.
So patriarchal culture actually
Yeah,
dominates whatever legal rights there are.
yes.
But at what point did you realize that you need to work for legislative change also, introduce new laws which helps
Uh,
women?
at one time, there were some amendments being made, and I felt that those were good amendments, and um, they kind of got stuck in the parliament. And I thought, okay, we only talk about awareness and we talk with groups of women and other people, but we need to get into the parliament and then have push these laws through. And these were about six laws. I mean, my law came later. My law I'm calling when I started writing the
Okay.
draft. Um, so in those terms, there was some of these laws, and then when we analyzed them, we saw some of them were very good, and they were one was about rape, and for a long time our rape laws were totally messed up by Ziaul Haq Sahab,
Right.
and and it was horrible. I mean, actually, being a part of the crisis center for women, we would advise women not to go to the police because our rape laws were so bad at a certain point that we felt that they would be locked up. you know.
Yeah, you're right. They were very much against the woman
Yes.
based on very literal obscurantist interpretation of
Yes.
religion. Yeah.
Yes. So so these changes, these amendments were good, and then we started talking to the parliamentarians, and I had no connections. I do not come from a family where a lot of my aunts and uncles are in the parliament. So we had to start establishing contacts. And then I was now this is important point. I totally believe that I do not have to go to one party. Why? Because we think that there are some liberal parties, some conservative parties, but in my experience, as I started meeting them, I used to go and sit in the guest,
Gallery.
yeah,
Guest
gallery,
gallery of the
guest
parliament.
gallery
Yeah.
of the parliament. And I'm a researcher, so I used to just observe what was going on, and that is what taught me a lot. And I noticed that there were people from all different parties who would get up and make a good point, and there were people who would just run down anything logical. And I felt that it is very difficult to point out one party, even if I had more support for one party or the other, or the liberal parties. But I felt that I needed to approach all parties and the slightly progressive people of all parties
I
and give.
agree with you, Fouzia, 100% because it's a non-partisan issue, and you are right. We have to reach out to all of them. That
Yes,
is the kind of thing we need to build if we want
yes.
legislative change. Yes,
And also, there are liberals and conservatives in all parties. It's
you are
very
right.
difficult. Yeah, I mean, there are certain parties who would always go against women. That is a
Yeah,
different story. But in general, I have found that you can find support in all parties. You just have
yes,
to approach them, explain things to them, and then you would find that they will support you. And at
exactly.
times they won't. The most
Because
liberal. Huh,
I remember on Hudud ordinance,
yes.
Tufail Hashmi, who was one of the religious scholars,
Yeah.
he very clearly wrote about Hudud ordinance, what were the gaps and holes.
Mm,
So you can find people everywhere. You are right.
yes.
I mean, whatever they say, something else, how they understand, how they act, there's possibility across the spectrum.
Yes. And
Mm.
I think the important thing is how you approach them. What kind of lobbying do you do, and how you build that relationship? If they trust you, if they understand that you are well meaning, they would come with you. And so a lot of myths broke for me. The myth about there are liberal parties and there are conservative parties, and there are good people and bad people. So sometimes people in very good positions and whose job was this to look after the legislation, etc., they would not side with us. I mean, ministries, I don't want to really name any,
Yeah,
but women's ministry was a whole ministry created for women's issues.
yeah,
And it was amazing how much of their work we used to do, and
exactly.
write letters for them and organize consultations on their behalf. So this was all a myth. And I also realized that government was not one entity. People say, oh, government should do this, government should do that. And I realized, my God, these are all the components within the government. And it is not a one entity, one gray blob that we call
Yeah, yeah,
government.
yeah. It's not monolith. It's
No,
yeah. This is very profound. These things are very important for people to know how our power structure works,
yes,
how vulnerable and weak and soft it is from inside,
yes.
and
And
how, yeah,
the components are so different. Elected components are very different from the bureaucratic components, the
yeah,
administrative side, and a world of difference. People keep changing, faces keep changing, but their duties, their cultures, their bringing up is so different. And
Yeah.
when we talk within ourselves, the change makers or the activists, we just say, oh, the government this and the
Yeah.
government that. And the government has so many colors and so many components. So,
Exactly.
anyway, I was saying that a lot of my myths broke, and that was the learning process. And so initially that was my learning period. And the point that we were very gung-ho about was sexual harassment,
Right.
because in the Angrez ka daur, they used to say, the bureaucrats used to tell me, oh, this law, this that the Angrez developed, they covered everything and so
Yeah.
well. And so I said, but the definition of harassment is not there. And then even fine, you don't go into sexual humiliation and other big crimes, but there is nothing after that. They say if you have a song playing very loudly and it is disturbing others, that is not nice. So things like that, very vague things.
Yeah.
So we wanted to bring in legislation to curb sexual harassment, because through our own experience, we realize that working women face that, women in public spaces, when they go to a hospital, when they go to a market, when they go to do a job, they face that a lot. And that is one of the biggest, it curbs women to come out of their traditional, very narrowly defined traditional roles. So we said that we want to create a definition for it. So it was difficult initially, but within ourselves, women's groups, especially working women's group, we formed ourselves into an alliance called ASHA, Alliance Against Sexual Harassment. Uh, and we organized ourselves. So we did a research for the whole of our country, uh, checking out women in 4 or 5 different professions and seeing if there are women in sales, what kind of harassment do they face, if there are women in office work, women working at home as servants in other families. So we gathered our data, then we evolved a whole system of how we can put together a definition and say this is not done and this can be allowed. So what I'm saying is that we did a lot of homework ourselves.
Yes.
And once we had a rough draft ready of how we would do that, it entailed the working places to adopt a code of conduct whereby they would say, okay, any employee who experiences this will be taken to investigation and then these punishments will be given. But for that, we needed the employers on our side. We focused on employment because we thought we would find more structure in the markets, etc. We won't have structure, or in the parks. So we organized ourselves, we tested out, then we went to a few employers and we asked them to adopt it, like we talked to their boards and they
Right.
adopted, and it started working. And then we said, now we cannot go to each institution ourselves. We need a backing of a legislation of a government, so
Right.
that people are bound to adopt this. And that is when we started our learning session number 2. I mean, initial learning
Okay.
session was more of breaking the myths and understanding the system.
Yeah.
But the second session was very rigorous, second learning session, because that is where we went and we started developing our relationship with the parliamentarians.
Okay.
So a lot of people thought, and I would say senior people thought, that if we have a legislative idea, we of course will go to the opposition,
Right.
because ideas always come from that side. The government resists, the government doesn't want to do it, and you have to push the government, you have to bash the government, the media will bash the government.
Yeah.
So that is what they said was the process. And our Learning said no.
Yeah.
If the government is in power, why won't we call the government and say, this is what we want to do? This will make the system better. Please help us.
Right.
So we took it. We took this draft legislation and we wanted this as a government legislation. So that surprised a lot of people that we are going on a wrong way, but our own
Yeah.
learning told us that no,
Yeah.
we will not go as a. I mean, we said the government is in majority, bhai.
Yeah.
The government
Why
is in,
not to talk to them first? Yeah. That's
yes,
right.
and they are the ones responsible, and the credit will go to them. So if we
Exactly.
can convince them, then that is the way to go. But the thing was that I did not only talk to the government people and the ruling party, we talked to all parties.
Two short questions, Fouzia. One is, did you have any lawyer in your team or lawyers? And did you go to women caucus in the parliament?
Okay. No, we did not have a specific lawyer to lead this process, but what we did was we gathered volunteers. I mean, we were fully trained activists. So we gathered volunteers like anything. So I had retired judges, senior lawyers who practice or not practice, and we made committees
Okay.
and we would write out things and I would sit with them and get their opinions. And they were very open. So we had a lot of people who were helping us out.
So you had all these people in your team, retired judges,
Yes,
lawyers, all kind
yes.
of people, and you decided
And
that,
a
yeah,
lot of working women also. A lot of working women also. Yeah.
great.
So we used to operate in teams. And the parliamentarians also said, Kecha, so you will come on the day, there is one day in a week where they accept proposals from outside or opposition
Okay.
can submit. And we said,
Okay.
no way. We are coming through the government. And so they were they were surprised. Then the ruling party was Pakistan People's Party at the time, and
Okay.
we talked to a few senior people there, and they said, well, our main lawyers have to be on board if the government takes this on. So we said, okay, who are those? So Prime Minister was one, and there were some other. Raza Rabbani was another one, Farooq Naik. So we said, fine. So we had individual meetings with these people. And once they were convinced and we thought they were taking the interest, then we said, okay, let's prepare now. Let's prepare the rest of the party and the parties. So we got cliques of support in
Okay.
every party, in every
Okay.
party.
All right.
So we were not worried about numbers. I mean, yes, the ruling party we had to have, but we were not worried about numbers because we knew that we had supporters from the opposition also. We did go to the caucus once, and the speaker at the time was heading the caucus. At that time, we did not have enough safarishes to enter the doors.
Okay.
So it was all right. But individual support we had. And once the individual support kind of built up, then we were able to talk to the head person of the caucus also. And there were many individual members of the caucus that were very helpful. But it was not an issue that was quickly taken up by the caucus. And I think the Women's Caucus is one of the best things that happened.
Right.
Yeah, because after this law, we saw how these women came close. And across party support is very important. And the
Yeah.
caucus did provide that platform for across party support.
Can I ask a question here?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, two questions. One is about the various committees that you created. Can you talk about the roles and the jobs of each committee? And the other question about what you just mentioned about needing a Safarish. Um, could you talk about witnesses or like references that you need in the government to do things, a little bit about that?
Okay. Yes, we realized that we need even to have an appointment, even to have a meeting, we needed some kind of reference. And we realized very quickly that these are very busy people. So it's not that if I cannot have a meeting with somebody, that means that they are snobbish and they do not want to change. No, it's just that they are very busy people. And if you go through somebody, somebody would call up a senior person and say, well, so and so wants to meet you regarding this point. And if they say okay and they give you an appointment, welcome, that's great. Like I went to meet Raza Rabbani Sahab through Shanaz Wazir Ali. Now, Shanaz had been a part of the women's activists, and I was familiar with her. So I told her, I said, I want to meet these four lawyers in your party, and first one is Raza Rabbani. And she says, okay, I'll make a call. Okay.
Right.
So they also know. So she called him and she said, "Ke so and so, and she has a good credibility and she comes from the
Yeah.
movement. And why don't you meet her?" And when I called, he gave me an appointment, and that was great. So I think when people back off and say, oh, these people don't give us time, they don't pay attention to us, that is unfair.
Yeah.
I mean, they have a lot of work to do.
Exactly.
So my experience in the first meeting was very good because I had left all the documents, my research documents and my draft bill, etc., for him. And when I went to meet him, he had not only read all the documents, but he had made little notes in the margin, underlined
Wow.
things. So I was like, I was so surprised that people can give attention to these kinds of ideas. And he asked me very good questions as to how will you ensure this and how will you ensure that. And I did my best. And then he suggested, okay, but you need to write this down towards things.
Yeah.
So so some of these people were had a track record of being positive and being fair, but there were many other people who were not, and we convinced them. I mean, there were people who would see in Pakistan talking about sexual harassment is a bad thing in any case.
Yeah.
And a woman coming to talk about that is worse. So there were some senior parliamentarians from other parties who would actually look at each other and laugh and joke about it. And I remember I used to be so firm. And I would say that, we women who have seen this happen or who have experienced this, sorry, it is not easy for us to joke about it
Yeah.
or to join the laughter when you joke.
Right.
So I was, I mean, later those people got into senior positions also. But I remember that I was not rude at all, but I
Right.
was very firm. And I think they got through, the message got through. And then we
Yeah.
arranged group meetings where we would bring a group of home based workers, for example, to meet a few senators or parliamentarians, and they would describe their experience, and the message does get through.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were a lot of challenges. I won't say they weren't challenges, but we went through. Acha, there is another important point I want to say is that um, people like me or others who are into this kind of business, they think to convince parliamentarians is the thing. But if we want to act through the parliament, there are many other levels of people too. So it was the PAs, the security
Right.
guards, it was the colleagues, it was the staff who writes minutes. We had to build relationship with everybody,
Yeah.
you know,
Right. You are right. These are
and
very valuable things, insights, because you
yeah,
have they, if they are not friendly with you, they are the gatekeepers.
yes, yes. And now websites and net, we can operate through that. In those days, yes, those things were there, but they were not. For example, when is the next meeting? Used to be our most mysterious question. Now you find the agenda and everything on the website if you open.
Yeah.
But when is the next meeting? And we could not bother senior parliamentarians to say, when are you meeting next? What is on the agenda? No, you have to get all that information from the staff. So
Right.
you have to have good relations with the staff in order to ask these super confidential questions. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's all
I,
about trust building. It is very important. Trust
yes,
building is
yes.
giving respect to the people that you are interacting with, irrespective
And
of their
also
level. Yeah.
knowing that this lobbying and this relationship building is very important. I had become so friendly with the, we call them peons, but they are
Yeah.
information
Naib
carriers,
Qasid, Naib Qasid or
yeah,
peons.
message
Yeah.
carriers
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
of the assembly. They're all in uniform with achkan and a turban and all. I had become very friendly with them because from time to time I had to write a chit, a
Right.
piece of paper, and say,
Yeah.
go and give it to that parliamentarian. So it
Yeah.
was these people who would take, it was not part of their job, but they were the
Exactly.
ones who could go in. I could not go into the parliament, you know,
Right.
I could
Yeah.
only go in the visiting gallery. But these people could. So
Yeah.
we would send them messages and many things, send papers, things like that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was just an important learning that we had
Right.
to start building our relationships from the person who was standing outside the door of a minister, for example. And
Could
then
I
the,
say that as an outsider, you
mm,
will learn the knowledge of the insider, made the connections that an insider has,
yes,
and made inroads to the power structure. You learned how to work with the system. That was the most important part.
yes.
Yeah.
And what are the roles of each person, and so that I don't carry my stereotypes
Yeah.
and my myths into this system. I
Yeah.
learned. And then
Yes.
wherever for me, it was easier. I mean, we were a whole group also because I was a researcher. And
Right.
so, you quickly observe and you get the culture. For example, we used to sit in the galleries and then just observe sessions.
Right.
And and I observed that when two or three senior parliamentarians would get up and support something, there would be other voices also in the same direction.
Right.
And if one or two troublemakers, they
Yeah.
would stop something, then it would be very difficult for others to support it. Now,
Right.
this was something we learned just out of observation. So when our bill finally, eventually, I'll tell you other things about it too,
Okay.
but eventually it got into the parliament. You think
Right.
we had not lined up who would get up and speak? Oh, ho, ho. And we told them, the strong supporters,
Yeah.
we said, you will speak in the first 10 minutes because we
Right.
wanted the pattern to be set. And
Yes.
we said, Ki, you send the request to the speaker beforehand that I
Okay.
want to speak on this agenda item.
Right.
Because when people raise their hands, who knows whose turn gets first.
Yeah.
To the extent that we even picked supportive people in the opposition
Right.
and we gave them pointers on slips of paper to speak.
Okay.
Not they didn't know what to say, but just had discussions, and to be sure that we are requesting them to get up and speak. So we thought if a few people from the opposition also sided with it, then it'll be easier for people to get up and be supportive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And it did happen eventually. When it happened, it did happen that a few people opposed it so badly, which we were not expecting. That was from
Okay.
the religious parties.
Right. Right.
They
Yeah.
got up and they opposed it so much that everybody just went quiet.
Yeah. They
And
got scared. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
so luckily, our bill moved to the next day, and then we had like about 10 hours or 12 hours to prepare.
Okay.
And so we went and we identified people and we requested them that when these mullahs would say things,
Right.
you have to counter, because
Yeah.
we needed to change that whole scenario.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, I have a question here about the
Yeah.
religious parties. Something that I really struggle to understand is that it's Islamic to support women's rights, to support,
Yeah.
victims of harassment, etc. Like, I don't understand where this gap comes from.
Well, in our society in general, also, not just in the parliament, people are very hesitant to come on media and say negative things about religious parties or their stance. That is a whole different story, because they know they can beat you up in one way or the other. But you are right that yes, in Islam, there's nothing that says go ahead and harass women. No, and there are specific Quranic verses that say that even looking, even staring is not allowed. But what these party leaders said was, in general, whenever women get their rights or more space to operate, in general they disregard that because of the patriarchal system, because they both uh, mesh up together. But in a way, they made their point saying that if a woman is Islamic and is abiding by Islamic laws, there is no way anybody would harass her. Because there is a myth that if some woman is experiencing harassment, it is because of her own misdoing. So they said that these women uh, who have this issue or who are bringing legislation, actually they are not living their lives by Islamic principles, otherwise they will never be harassed.
No.
And then they said these women are from NGOs and they go out and travel, and they, on their official travels, they stay in hotels. Oh my God. And many other things. So they said they're not, this is not worth putting in all the efforts because they are not law abiding or Islamic abiding.
Yeah.
That was their main argument. But the thing is how much fuss they could make and how much other people could get frightened.
Right. Right. Yeah. That's very important because they stereotype women,
Yeah.
and based on that, they say things, and nobody challenges them, thinking that they are custodian of Islam.
Mhm.
Talking against them is
Yes.
talking against Islam,
Yes.
and that's a very important issue to handle. But did you find any support among women in the Islamic parties, women parliamentarians?
Frankly, hardly any.
Okay.
But we did find support among the women members of the parties, not
Okay.
the representatives. For
Okay.
example, there was one time when we had gathered a lot of women on the streets, even though protest rallies were not part of our strategy.
Yeah.
But these religious parties brought a lot of men plus women, and they had them placed on the other side of the street. There was
Okay.
one time like that. So I remember I took the microphone and I made a speech just approaching them
Right.
and saying that women eventually get beaten up when they're married and this and that and that. And I found that women were able to connect. So they
Okay.
approached me, three, four women approached me and they said, come and talk to us. So I went talk to them and they actually left the protest. They, not just three, four women, but a lot of them. Yeah.
Okay.
So among the members, yes. Among the representatives, not much. But I
Yeah.
must say that the women in other parties were supportive.
Okay. All
Not
right.
all, but many of
Yeah.
them. And
Right.
that is how we got the support in the caucus also. And that is how we got support in other parties.
Great. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you
You
so much,
asked me
Fouzia. Yeah.
you asked me a question about these committees. Now, what we did was you asked me about the roles of these committees. The legal expertise we used to ask them when we would draft or redraft, we would ask them to just go through it and see if we have made any mistake or something. But otherwise, for lobbying purposes, we had these phone groups And we would say, we are trying so hard to get to the, some lawyer or somebody,
Right.
and we need to get a contact. So somebody from Karachi or somewhere would send a message back saying, oh, he used to be my class fellow. Oh, good. Okay. So I will send an introduction, because, when the law has to be presented, it is presented by the relevant minister
Right.
uh, of the party. And if that minister happens to be sick, then you have to wait for the next opportunity, etc. So there were times when we needed people very badly, and we wanted them to come and support us. And it was this large group of media is another segment that I want to just mention a few words, that we were very in with the media, and it was not like the current political party. No, 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 it
Right.
was not like bashing, but
Yeah.
because we raised the awareness of working women and private sector people, and we did a lot of programs with media, so they had developed that sympathy with us.
Yeah.
They had become part of the movement. And there was a time when we developed public service messages, and Geo at the time did a whole campaign free of charge
Okay. Yeah.
in
Great.
animated forms. So what happened was that when we wanted the media to help us, we would ask them, and they would help us. And we said, there was a time when people thought that this was coming from the opposition, and we kept saying through the media that no, it is the government that is bringing this law, and we are very happy about it. We had told, now this is a secret thing I'm telling, we had told our media friends that we want to have a big applaud for the government when this
Right.
passes.
Yeah.
And this is something that the common people and, in general, members of different parties would not understand.
Right.
And we wanted a big applaud for the parliament, because they did work hard with us.
Yeah.
And when it got passed, I think it was on the front page, big news of the key newspapers. The channels covered it thoroughly and clapped for the government. And so that people do not understand that it is not your ultimate duty to bash the government, bash the government,
Yeah.
bash the government. They think they are truthful and they are loyal to people if they are bashing the government. Are Baba, out of 100 initiatives,
Yeah.
there would be 10 that would be good for people. So
Right.
side with them and say, yes, that is good. This is what you have done. This is what we can do. You know?
Exactly. Right.
So
Great.
media helped us a lot. Yeah. Channels. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you
Okay.
so much,
Yeah.
Fouzia.
Thank you
Yeah.
so
Thank
much.
you. We'll be in touch. We'll talk more about this.
Yes.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay.
Okay.
Take
Khuda
care.
Hafiz.
Thank you.
Hafiz.
Goodbye.